from you, right?
That means a lot coming from you. Right. Okay, welcome everybody to this second one for today webinar from Local Government Association Open Data Institute. With me today is Emily from the Open Data Institute.
Hiya.
Emily's going to be making sure I stay on topic and on time and monitoring you, sending in your questions. We've got some introductory notes which I will need to check so I don't miss anything. Can everybody see and hear us? You just drop a comment in the chat window in YouTube just to say yes, hello, come through loud and clear, because last time some people had some technical problems. We'll just check that everything is working as it should be. There's a slight lag whilst whatever you do makes its way through to us, so Emily will tell me if everything is happening like it should be. So we're going to be looking at the LGA's e-learning module, making an impact with data. Emily says something completely different then, luckily I wrote it down. Making an impact with data, and specifically open data, but we'll also cover sort of data sharing and working well with other people's data. Why is it me delivering this? All right, if you don't know me, I'm Lucy Knight. I work for Devon County Council, so I'm a local gov person as well. I'm a project manager in strategy and policy area, but I also do lots of data and open data. Added to that, I'm one of the Open Data Institute registered trainers, and I usually cover local government public sector courses, and I also help to run the Open Data Institute node in Devon. So quite immersed in all of this, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions. If I can't, I certainly know somebody who can. We're going to spend about 20 minutes looking at the e-learning module and just going through the bits of it and the key messages that it's giving, and then for about another 40 minutes we'll be open to questions and discussions. So if you've got anything you want to know more about, you want me to go into more detail, just weigh in. You can ask questions by popping a comment in the chat window in YouTube. If you're in Knowledge Hub at the moment, you can put a comment in there. We're monitoring that too. If neither of those methods work for you, then you can email training@theodi.org, and Emily is monitoring that account as well. So if anything pops up, any questions, any comments, she'll let me know, and we'll take a minute and answer that. Ask a question at any time. Just put it in there, and we will work through them as they come in. Okay. The LGA have also asked if you have any feedback at all about how this has gone, whether it was useful, whether it could have covered slightly different things. Let them know. The email address for that one, transparency@local.gov.uk. Drop them a line, let them know what you thought. Any questions before we get started? Anything coming yet, Emily?
Everything fine. Just to let you know, if you want to follow along with the module, I will put the link in the chat in just a minute, or you can access course 6 at lga.learndata.info, and we are looking at module 4, making an impact with data.
Everything else is going to be done with the Ada post-its from this point on, which are all over the table. Sadly, you can't see that. So I'm going to screen share now. We're just going to take a look at the e-learning module.
Just click screen share.
It's a good thing Emily's here.
The green button. Yeah.
Thank you. And share. There we go. Right. This is still where we left it for the last one this morning. So this one is about making an impact with data, and it's covering, as you can see at the top here, in this module we will cover the benefits of better data use, how local authorities can maximise impact, and some case studies of effective data use. I, in plain English, categorise those as why you should do it, how to do it really well, and some examples of how some other people have done it really well. It's as simple as that. How do you get started? How do you make it good? And who can help you? This is very much about, there is a network of people who are working on this, and they're more than happy to talk about how they've been doing it. So the first section of the module here is about just close that down, the benefits of better data use. So like I said, we're focusing on open data, but this is not just about the stuff that you publish. This is about just the data that you have in your organisation and how you get more use from it. The first heading here, and these will all expand if you do the module yourself, these expand, so you sort of pop that down and take a look at what's in there. Transparency is top of the list, transparency and accountability. And for me, this is very much a given. This is just something we should do. This is the sector that we work in. We are accountable. We should be scrutinised to a degree, and people should be able to see what it is that we're up to. So improve your data and share it where you can, where it's appropriate. be open, be more helpful, be more clear, make your data more useful. And one of the side effects of opening up more data as open data is that you will get that pushback and that feedback about whether or not it's useful, whether or not it's good enough, whether or not it's current, is it structured, is it explained and laid out in a way that makes it usable for other people. And that will lead you to be thinking about, well, what about the data that we're not sharing, we're not publishing, but just the data that we use ourselves? Can we do better with that? Can we add something to it? Can we add more value to it? Can we link it up with other data and make it more useful? So it can only be a good thing. Like I say, transparency should be a given. It's like puppies and sunshine, it's an undeniable good. But there's work to be done to make it happen. But nevertheless, it should be, as far as I'm concerned, it is the key driver. It's just a thing we ought to be doing. There's some examples here. I won't open all these up because it'll take forever to go through them all, but you can take a look at how other authorities have done this. So the Greater London Authority, Camden, Bristol, Cambridgeshire, Trafford and Sheffield all have open data portals, which is just a place to put your open data sets in a way that makes it easy for other people to go find them and search them. Leeds has got a portal for the whole region now, the Data Mill North, which started off as the Leeds Data Mill. But they've built that infrastructure, they've built capability, they put the guidance around it so that it can be used by lots of different people, not just councils. So they've done some really good work, and I'd encourage you to check all of those out just to see what they've been up to. So that's transparency and accountability. Next on the list, improving services. So I'm having to lean forward to look at this because the laptop is far back enough that you can see both me and Emily at the same time. So improving services, making your data useful means we get more from it. And that can help us then to do a better job of what it is we're supposed to be doing. So the more our data feeds back into what are we here for, why are we doing this, and how do we do a better job at it, the more you've got an opportunity to make the case for doing things in a slightly different way. And that can count for your existing data, just making sure that it's more usable, that it brings some insight into the way the service is being delivered, but also new data. And I'm thinking this example here in the module about Milton Keynes have put out parking sensors. So there is something about having that information about where, when and why people are parking and where the spaces are, and having that information available to people who are driving around trying to find a space. That makes it immediately useful for the people who want to park, obviously, makes it immediately useful for anybody who's maintaining car parks and needs to sort of go around and check out issues, see why certain things might be happening, but also after the fact, that data could be analysed. Indeed, that could be anonymised, and you take out anything that's in there like licence plates. And you can then put that out there and other people can take a look and analyse it. It might be of use to shops or market traders. So when, at what time, which days and where might we be looking at setting up a store. And shops might think about later opening hours if it looks like lots of people are parking in a particular place on a particular evening. Might be close to a theatre, late night show, something like that. So there are ways that this data might get used that would improve not just our own services, but also the way other people respond to the needs of citizens that we just don't think about, that we just wouldn't have considered, because that's not really what we do. So it's good to have that sort of information coming through. Okay, next one is improving efficiency. Now we've heard a lot about how open data is going to improve efficiency, it's going to make everything better for us, and that usually is the precursor to something like streamlining back office services or something. But when I think about efficiency, I actually think about my first job when I joined the council was I was an analyst in database admin, and probably 90% of my workday was spent just cleaning up data, just finding who owned it, persuading them to give it to me, waiting for them to give it to me, and then turning it into something I could actually use. Lots of working in Excel, lots of manual processing, so many lookups to try and get the proper geographic information in there to make sure we could look up stuff by ward or by town. And all of that, if you have to just keep redoing that because the data you're being given is not quite as you need it, it's a massive drain on your time. And the analysts in your organisation are smart people who could be doing better, more interesting, more pertinent things. So getting your data in order gives you that efficiency, just in terms not of having to have fewer people, but being able to have your people do more advanced, more useful things, because the data itself, the structure of it, the quality of it is taken care of. And I think that's quite crucial. If we want to get smarter, one of the things we're going to have to be able to do is to let people investigate what's going on with the data and not have them spend days and days and days trawling through it just to make it usable. So the last block here is about empowering citizens. So this is about them holding us to account, but also, for me, this thing about communicating properly with people, with the community, is about, if we give them the information, then they can think of other things to do with it that we wouldn't have considered. And again, back to that example of the parking sensors and how that might actually help businesses in a place. There'll be community groups, there'll be community interest companies, there'll be SMEs, there'll be individuals out there who have ideas about the way things could be or ought to be done to support, say, vulnerable people in an area. And given the data, they can start to prioritise their resources and start to form a plan, and they can think about where they're going to apply for funding, perhaps. They can use targeted data to say, this is an area where public transport is poor, maybe, or this is an area where this health issue is particularly prevalent, therefore that's where we're going to work. We don't have a monopoly on good ideas, even when it comes to areas that traditionally have been very public sector, so like social care, like supporting the vulnerable, like supporting the elderly. We don't have all the good ideas. And putting some of the data about transport, about areas of need, about health issues, suitably anonymised, aggregated up to a level where no one's private data is being shared, can be extremely useful. And an example that we've got locally is Devon Communities Together as a support body for charities and non-profits in Devon. And they've instituted an open data working group, which is interesting. It's not being run by the council. This is them. They run it. We're invited. So are all the other authorities in Devon and the university, and a number of different charities and non-profit organisations who would just like to contribute their data or take advantage of whatever it is that we're doing. And so in partnership, that group has got a couple of projects on the go, one of which is going to be a map where we just layer up what we know about transport, about deprivation, about income, about health issues. And we specifically are looking for all that open data to tell us where people who are already vulnerable through income, old age, poor health, and combinations of those things are also disadvantaged by not being able to easily get to hospital or to a GP appointment or to a centre, shopping centre or whatever. So that we can then look at, well, where do we want to be placing resources? If people want support, can we steer them towards working in those areas to support the people there? So that's a really interesting project, and that will be coming up soon as an open web map that we hope to share. I think the council is going to host that. So really pleased with that one. But, and I've got to post it here, and I had to add some stuff to it because last time I forgot. When we talk about community, we should always remember that the community is not some amorphous blob of people who are, in quote, not council people. They are all the people who have an interest in what it is that we've got, the information and the data. So that includes your frontline staff. That includes people who are right at the sharp end of delivering services. What data and information do they need, and how can you help them? It includes counsellors. They have information needs as well. Where are we not plugging the gaps with them? Where are we not helping them do what they need to do? It includes your finance teams and HR and ICT and procurement and information governance. Obviously have a view on all of this, and maybe they need data too. Maybe they need some support with working with the data that they've got. It includes your policy and your strategy teams. It includes your democratic services, all these people who have potentially something they could do with more information, or information in a better format, or information better presented. At the moment, they can't do. So when we talk about going out and making connections with the community, that should absolutely include the communities that exist within your organisation as well. Go and find out what is going on with people and how you can help them with whatever issues they're facing, and also how you personally, and I know this is true for me, might be contributing to the issues that they're facing, and how you can stop doing that and be more helpful. Because those conversations add a lot of value to whatever it is you're trying to do, finding out what issues other people are facing and how you can support. Right, so that's, having done that section, have we got any questions or comments, Emily?
So we have one from Michael Gilly, who said, from Drizzly Derby, who says, cleaning data sounds very familiar.
Yes.
In fact, are there any, this isn't a question, but what tools would you recommend for data cleaning for those of people who might spend quite a long time in Excel cleaning data manually?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my absolute favourite for that is Open Refine, which actually I first learned about here at the Open Data Institute, so that's apt. It's a free tool. It gives you what basically looks a bit like a spreadsheety view of your data, but you then have some really powerful tools for checking for typos, for trailing and leading spaces and text entries, for making sure that all your numbers are actually numbers, for making sure that if you've got two slightly different spellings of something, but one of them has a capital and the other doesn't, that you can actually look at them and say, no, those are the same thing, and Refine will make it so. Your data, although it opens up this view in a browser window, your data doesn't go anywhere. It stays on your own machine. So it's not, you're not sending it to anybody's servers. And it's incredibly helpful. And at Devon, this is now a thing that we can load onto our corporate machines. We made a case for it and got permission. And it is a massive, massive time saver. I mean, you can do all these things in Excel, but it will take you a very long time. So Open Refine is a really, really, really good tool. It'll blow your mind.
And at the ODI, we have an e-learning module that we've created just for using this and for data cleaning, which was free and openly licensed for anyone to access. So we will send that out with the links afterwards.
Yeah, I recommend you look at those. Really, really, really good.
Okay, so next question, completely different.
Okay.
To what extent can open data lead to open government? And should documents be published, redacted obviously, within minutes of meetings? Would that really help with transparency and accountability?
Oh, okay, that's a good one. My personal view is that yes, minutes and the documents that get put together on towards the making of decisions should be published, but I also feel that they should be published in a way that makes them searchable, so that you can go through them and say, you know, tell me everything about this decision that led to improvements to this roundabout near Barnstable, for example. I just plucked that one out of the air. I don't know if there has been. And in some cases, and a lot of councils are looking at using services like ModernGov, which gives you sort of the board pack, puts all your paperwork into a particular format, makes it viewable through an app, controls and your access for the appropriate levels of security and so on and so forth. And I've been meaning to have a little play with that, because there is a way of extracting the information if you've got the correct permissions. And I would dearly love to have that something that you could search through. So the short answer is yes, I believe that documents should also be open. But this is where we run up against absolute data purists, of which there are a few where I'm based today. So I'm looking out and seeing some faces. Will say that PDFs are not open data. I say if it's useful to the person who asked for it, then why are we arguing about the definition? I do believe that that narrative is as important to a lot of people as pure data sets are to others.
So we've got a comment from Alex here, Alex from the LGA.
Mm-hmm.
Translating what I may have interpreted as an incorrect question, saying that what Nick meant was open data will mean that different departments within the same local authority should be able to share data that's otherwise trapped in silos. It's obviously another issue that will help us with efficiency and effectiveness and help local authorities to discover all the data that's buried.
Yeah, no, absolutely yes to all of that. Thanks, Alex. That's a really good point, is that within a local authority, once you begin to work on open data, not only does that data get better because more people can see it, but also we're customer zero for our own data. You will have, you know, the bigger the organization, the more common this can be, that there will be somebody working on a data set on one end of the council that is urgently needed by somebody at the other end, and they simply don't know that that person and that data set already exists. And we'll just keep redoing that, or go searching for it, or have to go re-download it from the original source or whatever. So yes, the more we open data, the more we look at everything with a view to, well, can someone else use this? And if they can, where shall I put it? And how do I make sure they know it's there? The more you have a healthy sort of sharing culture. If you know it should exist, you should be able to lay your hand on it quite quickly, and that I think is a healthy environment to have. Okay. Any more questions before we move on to the next bit?
Not yet. Please do keep posting your questions in, and we will get to them after the next presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Do keep them coming. I'll move on to the next section of the e-learning module, which is maximising impact. So, I mean, the header here is it's only as effective as the impact that it creates. There are different views about what impact looks like, but let's take a look at what's in the module. So firstly, creating a data culture. So if you want your data to have impact, then you have to do stuff with it. It's got to be, I mean, it says here at the heart of the organisation, which I find a difficult phrase to pin down and actually say what that means. But for me, a data culture is what you get when your data is valued as an asset, as a tool, when it's actually consulted, when people look at it before they make big decisions, when your data is improved and maintained because people are constantly using it and constantly bringing it up to date and adding value to it somehow, adding links. And that data is consumed, because until it's actually part of all the processes where it belongs, until it's part of analysis and prediction and modelling and decision making and communication, it's not useful. So data culture is critical as far as I'm concerned, and that has to exist right the way throughout the organisation. But this is not a top-down thing. The thing about having an actual data culture is it's nice if your chief executive stands up in front of a staff presentation meeting and says, you know, we're a data-driven organisation. It's lovely to have that support, but saying it doesn't make it so. So at all levels, people should be talking about, what does the data say? What can we find out? What else ought we to collect so that we can work out what's going on here? And at each level, people should be asking questions of the data. They should be trusting that the data exists, that the data is in good enough condition to be usable, and they should be having that data presented to them in a way that helps them answer the question, get past the issue that they're trying to resolve. That's a data culture where you know or you believe that the data is there, you trust that data, and it forms part of what you're trying to do. I think we had questions about that this morning, didn't we, Emily? How do you make that happen? How do you make that happen, Lucy? Yes, this is the thing I like talking about, because it gives me the opportunity to go get right on my hobby horse. You make that happen by talking to people, because that's how it works, basically, by bringing something that you've made with data, an insight, a visualization, an analysis, a model, and saying, I have made this thing and I think that this thing is useful. Tell me if this helps or not, and if it doesn't, I'll go away and make some changes. So presenting even a small thing and saying, you know, I've decided to redo how we visualize the quarterly report for a particular scrutiny committee, for example, which is the thing that I did. Took to the members and said, here is what the data looks like at the moment. And we give it to you as this table. I'm considering presenting it as a series of charts. They look like this. Is this better or worse? A bit like being the optician, you know, when they wave a different lens in front of your face. Is it better now or was it better before? So we get the feedback immediately from the counsellors saying, yes, that's better, or yeah, that really helps. And then they begin to ask more questions. Can the data do this? Can you slice that by year? Can you show me a trend from 2011 onwards? What does that look like if we take this particular aspect out? And they begin to interrogate the data with this trust that the data will be there and the data will be able to help. So there is something about, again, you talk to people, you find out what issues they're up against, and you find a way to give them a small demonstration of how the data can support. And the more people trust that the data is there, the more they see that it can be used to resolve some of the questions, the more they will demand of the data. And that creates a pull then for the data to get better, for the communication of the data and the insights to get better. And it's kind of a virtuous circle, a reinforcing of the belief that the data can do the job, which helps you then to pull a little on the resource to keep improving the data and keep doing more work with it. So that's data culture. Any questions on that?
one more question, which is kind of connected to data culture.
Okay.
It's definitely something that we spoke about this morning as well. So it's about data sharing. And that age-old question, is there a data sharing agreement document you can download to use for joint working?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, we did. We talked about this one at length this morning as well, because somebody had submitted a question beforehand. So I had to do a data sharing agreement a couple of weeks ago, and I went straight to the Information Commissioner's Office site, and they have a series of guides there on data sharing, and one of them, although it doesn't give you a template document, it gives you the sections that a good data sharing agreement should have. So, you know, this document should contain a section that says who the authorised person is, who's receiving the data from the data provider. It should have a section that states who is responsible if you get FOIs or subject access requests around this data. It should have a section that says what happens when we're done with this particular project, and whether or not the data should be deleted or whether it should be stored or whether, and so on. And the kind of section that covers every possible scenario that might be of concern to the data provider who's going to be actually sharing the information. And after I'd looked at that and thought, well, that's useful, and I bookmarked that for future reference, I did a quick Google just to see if there were any good pre-existing documents, and I found one. I think it was a Scottish Government document, which I just basically borrowed that because it had all the sections that the ICO guide had outlined, and I've just borrowed that and just sort of substituted in the text that I needed, and it was actually really, really helpful. I think it came out at slightly over 2 sides of A4, so unbelievably concise for a government document. But it covers everything, and there's a space in there for talking about how you deal with security, with data security, how you deal with personal data, space in there for talking about how you've obtained that personal data and whether or not the people who provided that data in the first place have been properly informed, and so on and so forth. So yeah, if you come across that one, use that one, Scottish Government. But failing that, go to the ICO site and get the guide on data privacy, I think it is, and data sharing, and use the sections in their guide document. We'll send around an email with links, won't we, Emily? So I will dig those links out from my browsing history and add them to the email, and we'll send those out so you've got that to look at.
And I believe the LGA is also looking at creating a template.
That's right, yes. So there was, we can't look back at this morning's comments, can we? But if Alex, if you can weigh in and put that link into the, all that information into the chat window again, that'd be fantastic. So LGA will be doing some work on that and producing some guidance that we can all use, which I think is coming out reasonably soon, which will be very, very helpful and much appreciated.
Hopefully we've not just made that up, and there's Alex and Tim sitting there in a bit of a panic.
No, I totally remember that from this morning. That definitely really happened. So I'm sure it's fine. Okay, so that's data culture. Moving on to other impacts here. So problem-based data use simply is about, do you have a specific problem that needs to be sorted? And quite often we collect a lot of data that we don't really go back and look at. It's exhaust data. It just falls out of us doing our job. But we don't have a need to go back and look at it. But when we do, we can see that for analysis and for modelling, it's probably not quite good enough. That might lead to us changing the way we collect it. Or it might just mean that we have to bite the bullet and just clean that up and use it as it is. But having a specific question to answer can be brilliant, because quite often, and this is certainly my experience in my earlier years as an analyst, is that we tend to get asked quite vague questions. Can you tell me what's going on? Can you tell me what the trend is for the last 5 years? Well, yes, but there are more specific questions that could be asked, like what would happen if we move that boundary? Like what would the service level look like if we could only serve like 100 people? The sorts of questions we're having to answer at the moment about concentrating our resources. So having data that is around solving a problem also, I'm thinking of an example we've got going on at Devon County Council at the moment around actually what are we trying to achieve here? We can sometimes get very caught up in delivering our service as opposed to what's the outcome we're trying to make happen. Devon County Council is doing some work on purposeful systems and systems thinking at the moment, and one of the exercises that I'm going to be involved in very soon is helping the senior managers and the directors who are going to be like a system lead. So if you pick a system and say this system is about helping somebody get back into work, say, I mean, that's something that we do, but let's take that as an example. Then the outcome that we want is for that person to be back in work and self-supporting and happy and so on and so forth. But the service might be something like run a job club. And we consider ourselves to have been successful if we run 100 job clubs, even if nobody gets a job. And we need to change that thinking. So there's something about them. Well, what are we measuring here? How can we say we're successful if the outcome isn't happening? We're measuring the thing we can manage rather than actually pushing for measuring that the outcome is happening the way that it should be. So problem-based data use is great as long as you've defined what it is that you should be fixing, you should be solving. And then finding the data to answer that question, and more often than not finding you don't have the data to answer that question because that's not what you've measured for the last 5, 10, 20 years. Nevertheless, really, really useful thing to do. And the impact from getting that right is that you will then look back at the service and say, we potentially need to do some things differently. If we don't know if we're even getting it right or not, then there need to be some changes. Right, so moving on from that one, engaging with the community is an impact in its own right. Looking at the text under this block, yeah, data analysts should work directly with people in the organisational field to help solve the problem. But there's also something about, it's not necessarily always up to us, and going back to what I said before about it and the community, we don't have all the good ideas and we don't have all the answers, and sometimes what we can do is just be available to have a conversation, just to open the dialogue, and to say, we have some data that may help with that. Or we have some insights based on our prior work, and you're very welcome to share, that information. And yeah, and I do think that having the sort of relationship with the community, and again, that's a bit of a woolly term, having a good relationship with people at all levels in the organisation, having a good relationship with your support teams, finance, HR, procurement, so on and so forth, having a good relationship with counsellors to the point where they feel they can come and ask if you have data on something, or if you can help them to sort of make sense of data they've been given, is crucial. Because as much as we talk about data, and if you give me the least encouragement, I'll start talking about the tools and the tech as well. As much as we talk about all this, it's the people who make the difference. And it's the relationships and the conversations that lead you to solve problems. Data doesn't solve problems, people do. So there you go, my other favourite hobby horse. Last block is about measuring impact. And I think I've probably covered my thoughts on this already. This is about, how do you know whether or not you're making a difference? How do you know whether or not the service is successfully leading to the outcomes that you need? People supported, people helped, people educated, whatever it may be that the service is aiming to do. And what would that look like, and what data would you need to make that happen? So the purposeful systems work has been really valuable in making us at Devon question what it is we're actually trying to do, as opposed to just get the service delivered. And then when you're collecting the right data and you're putting that together and communicating that effectively, what you've got, as it says at the bottom of this block here, you've got case studies. And we, as people, as human beings, we respond much more strongly to narrative and to stories than we do to data. Unless you're a bit weird about data, like I am. Even though I like stories, I like people. So we respond more strongly to that, and having that backed up with data can be incredibly helpful to the people who are making the decisions, making the policy decisions and the resource decisions. So that can be quite critical. Right, I'm going to stop screen sharing and come back to, hang on, Sarah. Before, there are some case studies at the end of the module, which I'd be happy to go through if that's what people would like to do. I'm just going to check and see how we're doing with any questions or any discussions that people have got. Do we have anything at the moment?
I just refresh Knowledge Hub, because you have to refresh in order to see if anyone's commented anything, but I think no, for now we're okay. So yeah, for now we're okay.
Okie dokie. Right then, in that case, I'll go back to screen sharing and we'll look at the case studies. Now, when I was looking at these earlier, that's the magic button. There we go. I made some quick notes which, along the lines of the case studies that we've got here, and there's some really excellent work that's been going on, tend to fall into two main categories. There's the monitoring. There's what's going on right now, what are the conditions, and using and collecting the data that helps us to work out what's happening. So I think the example here we had Birmingham, who are using sensors to look at weather conditions. So what's the temperature, what's going on? Helps them to monitor very, very closely where the most critical areas are going to be when, for instance, the gritters have to go out. You can build up a lot of historical data that gives you a really, really good idea of where the problem areas are going to be. But this just adds an extra level of precision that you just can't get through historical observations and predictions. If something odd happens like right now and you need to get out there and deal with it, then that sort of monitoring is incredibly valuable. And I've actually seen as well, a colleague at Birmingham has got a way of monitoring the real-time traffic information, which is incredibly cool. And that sort of data can be very, very helpful as well. And then the second sort of category is the modelling, is based on historical data and looking forward. You look at the predictive model that says, based on the experiences of all the people who've ended up in this particular scenario, whether that's troubled families, whether that's social care needing to be taken into a home, whether that's children who've ended up with adoption, whether that's young people who've ended up not in employment, educational training. Looking at all the circumstances, are there factors that, if we pay attention to them, we can do a better job of supporting people in the future so that they don't end up also in this bad situation? So we'll start back at the beginning, we'll look at these examples. Newcastle City Council are looking at, anything relevant to care for young people. So not only does it help the people, the social workers and so on, and all the people who are supporting young people who are in difficulties for whatever reason going into care, it also potentially can help develop this picture of what happens to young people. What's the biggest indicator that means that young person might end up in a situation where they need a great deal of support and they may already be switched off. If they're not in employment, educational training at age 16 or 18, then, well, that's quite late in someone's life to try and inspire them, motivate them to do things differently. They may already have decided everyone else has given up on them. So how do we get in there earlier and help people not to end up there? So that's an example of not just the right here, right now supporting people, but also the modelling. How do we improve things for the next cohort? Manchester example is looking at the characteristics of a vulnerable family. So again, that modelling. There are people who are in a great deal of trouble, need lots of support, lots of help, lots of interventions, and we work with them, of course we do, but we also look at, well, how do people end up here? If we can look back at some of the history, and again, obviously we've talked about open data. This is not open data. This is shared as appropriate between the agencies who are dealing, working with these families. But there is a way of putting that data together and saying, what do we know about how people end up this vulnerable, this troubled, this much in need of support, that we could then be looking at how we support other families better, much earlier in the process, before they get to this sort of crisis stage where things are going really, really, really wrong. Next example there, Bristol. I love this example, the frog box sensors. If you haven't looked at this, I think we'll have to include that link, Emily, if you can make a note. This is absolutely delightful because this combines several of my favourite things. So hobby electronics, using a very small, very, very cheap computer called a Raspberry Pi, which at the moment, the most basic model you can buy for about £6. That's how cheap they are. And it's the size of a credit card. I'm putting this with a couple of sensors into this incredibly cheerful little plastic box that looks like a frog. It's got friendly eyes and everything. and using it to collect information about humidity levels in homes. So this serves a couple of different purposes. So one is it's monitoring right now what's going on. So if someone's in rented housing, social housing, they're concerned about damp and they're concerned about the impact on their health or on their child's health, then they can have one of these boxes in their home for a couple of weeks. It can monitor, and then the readings are looked at, and you can take action as appropriate. But there's also the potential to feed that into some modelling and to look across the city out of all the locations where this was done. Are we seeing any patterns? Potentially we could be looking at, is it just houses in a particular neighbourhood? Like maybe it was sort of reclaimed swampland, as is the case in some places in Devon, or reclaimed from the sea. Is it that it's properties of a particular age that were built in a particular style? And there's just something about they weren't built with a decent damp course, and that can happen. I've lived in places like that. Or is it places that are owned or managed by a particular company, and maybe that company needs a talking to? So once you collect enough of that data, you can also begin to look at preventative work, not just this person's in a damp property and they need to be moved and here's the proof, but rather this area is a problem and we need to examine what we can do about that, or this particular company is not doing the work and we need to talk to them. So I just love that one because it combines the simplicity of very, very cheap, very simple technology with the potential for community action and supporting individuals who really, really need that help. Next example, moving on. So we already did Birmingham with the sensors, and I already talked about the traffic management. Birmingham have some really, really good work going on around just how they use their data and do their analytics generally. So this is just like one small example. If you get the opportunity, and this is probably a really good time to point out that there is a network of local government people who do data and digital, and there are events run at least once a year. The local Gov Camp is one example, and Open Data Camp is another, where if you can get to them, and again we'll put links in the email that we send around, if you can get to them, it's your chance to talk to people who do this a lot, and will be able to help you get started, we'll give you examples of stuff that they've done, point you towards useful tools, and it's a really good opportunity to expand your network and talk to people who've already been there and done some of these things. And I personally always make it to these events if I can, and this is why, like I say, if I don't know the answer to a particular question, I guarantee you I know somebody who does, because it's an extremely friendly, extremely helpful network to be part of. There's also Local Gov Digital, which is more online, although we are having regional meetings. They support and run Local Gov Camp, but also very approachable, very friendly. Some of you guys, I think, threatened to listen into the webinar, so hi if you're listening. Local Gov Digital, really lovely people, really, really lovely. Moving on to the next example, so we have Suffolk, looking at integrated care provisions of health and social care. And this is good because they had a good look at actually what does successful care delivery or successful care look like, and how does that fit into the overall landscape, not just a specific service delivery for a particular type of person, a particular type of care, but also how do we look at that whole journey, and how do we look at all the providers who are going to touch that person as they go through that system, through that journey, and how do we make things better, make the service more effective and help people get help sooner, so they end up so they don't end up in the system quite as soon as they would, or they don't end up having to go into care as soon as they otherwise would. And then you click on all the links in the module and sort of follow these up and see what's being done. And this final example, this is Camden. So they've done some really, really good work with dashboards of their own to monitor particular metrics and trends, so that they've got a view of what's going on right now. It means that if an issue pops up, they can deal with it faster, which is obviously a plus. Also being able to take a look at, do some really serious analysis of the data that comes in, and what looks like, what constitutes fraud. Things like school enrolment and council tax, which are big topics, obviously. People will sometimes try to play that system. If you have enough data, and you have some data about what the outcomes of some of those processes, then obviously you can begin to spot the patterns. You have good, robust data. You have good, solid information about what a problem looks like, what a potential fraud looks like, and you can be on the case much sooner, much more effectively if you've got that data all pulled together. So it's another really good example. And yeah, so the Camden Residence Index has a link there. You can follow that and you can take a look at the details. And that's pretty much the end of the module. We always ask you to do a couple of little mini quizzes just to check you're paying attention. And then there's a follow-up and other modules that you can look at. So definitely check those out. They are extremely useful and full of links through to the case studies we just talked about. I'm going to stop the screen share again. Come back to screen. And how are we doing for time? We've got 15 minutes, so if anyone's got any questions or comments.
Put them in. So it's quite quiet today. I'm not going to turn this into a competition, but the group this morning asked a lot more questions.
Yeah, they were a lot more lively.
But we do have one. So we talked a lot about maximising impact and achieving impact using data in local government. But we need to acknowledge that there are a lot of challenges. What would you say the main challenges are, and what tips do you have for overcoming them?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, we covered this morning as well, didn't we? So in my experience so far, the main challenges were legacy systems, old software systems, databases that didn't let us get our own data back out. And that's improving now. We're at a point where I think we're getting better at that procurement, that tendering process. We're asking more intelligent questions when it comes to data extract, data reporting tools, and, you know, can we have our data back out in these particular formats? And actually, that's why I hastily went back and added procurement to the list of people you ought to talk to in your organisation, because I'd left them off this morning. So sorry about that, procurement teams. They get the unenviable job of making sure that you get what you want from that procurement exercise, whilst at the same time not really knowing in detail what it is that would make you happy. So work with them when it comes to speccing a system that's going to hold data and that you're going to want data back out of. Try to be as clear as you can about what that's going to need to look like. And if it comes to discussions about there's this existing system you need to work with and I want data out of it and it's proving not to be possible, you've got to be talking to the people who are needing the data out of it, as well as the people who already get data out of it and how that works. And involve people at quite a lot of different levels and different bits of the organisation. So that's been a problem, but now I think more of a problem is that the better we get at getting data out, the cleverer we think we're being with plugging it into visualization tools and doing analysis and modeling and stuff with it, and the more open we're being with sharing what we're finding out. We are then coming up against, have we anonymized this properly? Have we summarized this correctly? Have we got our point across, but without sharing anything inappropriately? So for me now, that's becoming the issue. As the analysis and the visualization tools become more powerful and easier to plug into some of the data systems that we have, it's more important than ever to make sure that information governance is in the run and are checking that you're doing the right things with that data and that you're not inadvertently sharing information you shouldn't be sharing or publishing what you shouldn't be publishing. That helps.
I hope so.
All right,
I hope that helps.
Good.
So what if what if someone listening is in a very, very small council, I'm sure budget restraints, etc., and they're facing quite a lot of resistance to this in their council?
Mm-hmm.
How would you get started?
Okay. Okay. Step one: talk to people. Some organisations will have, teams and teams and teams of analysts and data people, and some will have like one person who does the spreadsheets, and that's it. But I guarantee you, no matter how small your organisation, there'll be people who know about data, whether it's part of their formal job description, job role, or not. They exist. They're definitely there, and there are people who will want to support you with this because it's the right thing to do, because it will improve things for them, for their colleagues as well. And yeah, there will be people who are reluctant to support this, whether it's very rarely, people aren't resistant to change just for the sake of being difficult. It may feel that way, but people resist change because change is dangerous, because you might get something wrong and you can't roll it back if you've accidentally released personal data. you have to accept that, you know, you messed up and you get fined, and people might get hurt. So people will resist change if they don't trust that it's going to be done properly and effectively. People will resist change because it may completely wreck the process that they've managed to get, you know, a nice functional way of delivering the service. You stroll in all bright-eyed, like, I've just found this shiny new thing, I really want to work on this and I want to do it, and you have to help me. They'll dig their heels in because you're making their life difficult. So if you want to get started, you have to come at it from a place of, I think this can help all of us. Tell me how I can do this in a way that makes it useful for you as well, rather than, I want to do this, I have a use for this, therefore everyone has to come with me. You're not going to progress. You've got to be understanding of other people's attitudes and concerns when it comes to opening all the data or sharing all the data or doing everything differently.
Yeah,
okay,
great. So a completely different question now. So this is from Nick via Knowledge Hub. Any thoughts on hackathons for helping developing data culture? And first of all, could you explain to us what a hackathon is?
Yes, I can. Okay, so hackathon is, well, there are two possible ways to describe this. One is that you open up a bunch of data and you make it available to a specific group of people at an event. So I don't know, you hire a hall, you order pizza and caffeinated fizzy beverages, and a bunch of software developers will show up and make an app with your data, hopefully. There might be prizes, you might pick the top 3 and fund them to develop it further, or you might just give everybody like a lifetime supply of Jaffa cakes. It really doesn't matter. A hackathon effectively is when people come together, and sometimes they can last for like 2-3 days and people sit up and code all night. And they come together to make that data into something useful. We're in the public sector, we're just beginning to discover hackathons as a thing. Developers really are like so over that. Unless there is some massive social good, what we're basically doing is asking people to come work for free. Developers, especially the individual ones, are self-employed. They really can't afford to show up and give 24 hours or 48 hours of their time for nothing. So whilst there is a place for a hack event and asking people to come support, there does need to be some good reason for people to show up and do that. And if it's just like, you know, we heard hackathons are cool, that's not really the best reason. But, you know, examples of things where actually this is useful. Now we had some events, so Local Gov Camp, which I mentioned earlier, has a talking day and then it has a making day. So the other way around, I think the making day might come first, where those people who are inclined to can have a go at hacking something together. And actually that doesn't always have to be specifically code. It can be as simple as a bunch of ideas on paper and people will put something together and make a paper prototype. And then if you have the resource, if you have the time, if enough people are interested, you can work out how to technically build a prototype of that. So that's always really good fun. Hacks don't have to be code, I think is probably the most important thing from my point of view. Hacks don't have to be code, it can be thinking on paper. And you don't need to import a bunch of developers to do that. Actually, you're probably better off doing that with your colleagues first and then working out if there's scope for a tool or an app or something that uses the data. Hope that helps.
Sure it does. So a comment from Michael saying, just because we're quiet doesn't mean we're not interested. He's thinking about how to apply all these good ideas and build the coalition of people who are willing to invest time and mental energy needed.
Excellent.
Any advice on that? How to build that coalition?
How to build a coalition? Okay, talk to people. Sign up for Local Gov Camp. Sign up for Open Data Camp if you can get to it. Sign up to Local Gov Digital. I don't know if you guys use Slack. It's like social media messaging collaboration platform. So we're talking on Slack almost constantly. Just, hey, has anyone done this thing? I'd like some advice, or does anyone know what's the best software for doing this other thing? So plug into the networks, most definitely. Also, I don't know where you're based, but it's worth a punt to see, if you're like me and you're in a 2-tier authority, if you're a district, talk to the county, talk to the other districts. If you're the county like me, talk to the districts. Find out who else locally is interested in doing some stuff. I went to an event couple of weeks ago and saw some really amazing stuff being done with particular code package that I'm not terribly familiar with. One of my colleagues who's based in Plymouth was also there. We're going to set up a study group because we both want to play with this thing so badly. There are some tutorials online, and we're going to have a study group where we sit and we learn together to use this thing because it just looks potentially so useful. So it may be that you can find, you know, someone else who also wants to learn to do this stuff, and we can sit and learn it together. Another thing is we're running a code club at Devon County Council. Haven't got loads of people coming, but we are building robots, so there's that. And once we built the robot, we learned to control it through code, and that's a really good introductory. It's aimed at school children, so it's at a level that we're all happy working with, and nobody feels stupid, nobody feels left behind, because this is lovely worksheets that we use from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Incredibly helpful. So I think it is about talk to people, find out who's interested, find out who can give time, and then plug into the networks, and then just do a little bit of learning to bring you a bit further forward, so you then have something to show to someone and say, this is worthwhile. Build a bit of support, and it's a reinforcing sort of spiral. As the more things you learn, the more useful things you put in front of people, the more opportunities you have to say, well, we know a bit about that, and with a bit more of a push, we can do some more with this thing. And keep showing that those things have uses and have benefits.
That's what Michael said as well, that show senior managers and other councillors what another council is doing. That's the quickest way to success.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also a nice segue to another question from Alistair Lee here. And one that's perhaps close to our heart, about learning and new skills. So another challenge is the change in skill sets needed for data extraction, manipulation, presentation, especially with the advent of new tools such as Tableau and expectation of what's possible.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, in a way, we should kind of hate all these smart people who make beautiful data visualizations and dashboards, because they've raised the bar massively, and it's not trivial to get to grips with these things. On the other hand, there is a lot that's possible with very, very simple basic tools. I mean, Tableau is brilliant, and you don't need to know how to code to use it. You just need to understand the data that you're putting in there. So you can do some really, really nice things with that. And again, we talk about not having skills in local government, and I think that we are doing our colleagues a massive disservice. There are some really smart people who work in local government who know, who can code, who can design, who can create web apps. It might not be what they're paid to do, it might not be their actual job or their role, but nevertheless, there will be people who can do this stuff, who do this stuff for fun and have these skills. So look out for those people, sort of find out what people might be working on as side projects, find out if someone's just started, you know, learning to code and would like to have a go at bringing that to your project. That can be really useful. One of the things I want to learn at the moment is a package called R, which is a language for doing statistical analysis, but also has data visualization. And a couple of plugins and add-ons that you can use to make web apps. And that's the thing that my colleague at Plymouth and I are going to be playing with. I've been learning Python, which is a really simple coding language, which is one we're using to program the robots. And that, again, has lots and lots of extra add-ons that you can use for really sophisticated data analysis and visualization. So you can start with something very, very simple and just work your way up to the level that you need to do the work that you need to do. And so many tutorials and free ebooks and help sites sort of raise a problem and some smart person will answer it all over the internet. So many helpful people on the internet to help you get started. But yeah, I think we do have the skills. We certainly have the willingness, and it's about helping people find a little bit of space to get started and gain some confidence with that, and confidence also that it will be viewed favourably and it will be used. It's something you can plug back into council work and say, well, I did this and I can add that now, add that value to what I usually do. It's just a new thing that I can do now as well.
Right. So I think this is our last question, although we will obviously be doing this again in June, and I should have looked up the date. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I will look that up. So question, to what extent should we have local authority communications managers involved in open data programs? Can they help with risk management? can they help with risk management?
Okay. Okay, so comms managers should be as involved as they want to be from a personal perspective. If they're interested in open data, then yeah, absolutely. There isn't a message to be managed with open data. There's the data. There's whether or not you are putting out the data as it should be, as raw as possible, with personal data removed, obviously. But there isn't really a message to be managed. So I don't think comms teams need to be involved from that point of view. I don't think, unless you mess up and put out personal data, I don't think there's a reputational danger or risk. And picking my words carefully, in my experience, it's best for that data to be put out by the person who owns it, or by somebody who has a relationship with all of the data people and can make sure that everything works as it should. Technically, the information governance is properly done, that data is being properly assessed, that you're not putting out personal data. And the message that goes with that is shouldn't be a corporate voice. It should be an individual, a personal voice. It should say, I've put this data out, or the council's put this data out, and if you want to know more about it, talk to me. You can use a mailbox, but I personally think this is supposed to be a dialogue. It's supposed to be a conversation, and a personal voice and an individual says, I look after this data, I put this data set together, I've got it ready for publishing. If you want to talk about it, here I am. Not contact the council through the contact centre. It should be more personal than that. If comms want to help making that look good, making sure that that fits the council's voice and tone, then great. If you make a massive mistake, obviously you need to let comms know straight away so they can start to help with managing the response to that. But yeah, I think they should be as involved as they would like to be involved, help you make that look good and make it work within sort of council branding. But it's not about managing a reputational risk, because the data is the data and it'll show what it'll show. You have to publish it and you have no control over what people are going to do with it, what they're going to find. So don't worry about it. I think it's probably a terrible answer, isn't it? Sorry.
I'm sure it's fine. So we have come to the end there of our webinar, just where someone's just. Maybe we've got time for one more quick one. Just one more. You're very, very lucky, Peter, there. So this is about data sharing again, trying to share customer data between borough council and county councils, another two-tier system, have a partnership, use a cloud-based business application, IT reluctant to share this data, easy and transparent way. How do you overcome this challenge?
Okay, that's a good one. Right, let me read that.
So first of all, it might be worth saying that the LGA are currently doing a consultation for IT procurement, so to make that easier, to make sure that you don't tie yourself into restrictive data sharing agreements, and we will send that link out afterwards if you'd like to be involved in that process.
Yeah, so I'm just reading the text of this, and my goodness, so there's an existing partnership, presumably there's a data sharing agreement, and it's not IT who are sharing the data. It should be IT who are providing the infrastructure to share the data. Now, if they have a problem with sharing it in a specific way, I'd be interested to understand what their reasons are. How can we overcome this? It makes it sound like a war. Let's make that more of a dialogue. So why is it an issue to share it in the way that you want it shared, or the way that the recipient wants it shared? Do they have concerns? I mean, I know that when I first started doing open data, I wanted to play with all the things, because that's just my nature, is I want to play with all the stuff. And almost all the stuff I wanted to play with had massive security implications. I simply didn't understand, because I'm not an IT person. I'm a nerd, but I'm not an IT person. So it took a lot of pushing back from IT, and it took some conversations for me to understand what the implications of my wants and wishes would be, and how things I wanted simply weren't possible. So I wonder very much what it is that IT is having a problem with. If they're saying, no, we can't share it in that particular format, it might be that introduces a vulnerability. It might be that it's just something they can't allow, because if something goes wrong, they won't be able to control what happens. It's worth knowing what that is and finding out what the options are. Definitely have that conversation. I can't see there's no easy answer. There's no way of forcing them to do it unless they're contractually obliged to. In which case they're being very difficult indeed. If it's simply that, yes, we'll do what you want, but not in the way you want us to, they have a reason. Find out what the reason is and try and get past that somehow. They need some reassurance, I think.
And perhaps the next webinar might help you as well, where we talk about advocating open data and convincing others, and not open data, the better use of data, so better sharing of data. And that I have looked up is on June the 6th, again at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So please do join us. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, comments, feedback, etc., please get in touch with Alex and Tim at transparency@local.gov.uk. The modules are here, lga.learndata.info, and we will send out all the links to you this afternoon. They're all the things that we mentioned.
Yeah.
And from this morning's webinar as well.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to follow up, have more of a conversation with me, and then we'll share my email address, I think, with everybody as well. So do get in touch. Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
And yeah, so thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your questions and comments. It's been really helpful for me as well.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Stop.